If there is one person who could be said to stand at the confluence of digital technology, security, and the commercial marketplace, it might be Ray Rothrock. He's the CEO of RedSeal, and he's a longtime thought leader in cybersecurity and a successful investor in this sector. As a venture capitalist for more than 2 decades, he's assisted entrepreneurs in achieving their dreams, and he's also produced outstanding financial returns for his limited partners. He's personally discovered, created, and guided more than 50 companies in the Venrock portfolio through their early stages of formation and emerging growth. Ray began his professional career as a nuclear engineer and then moved into building, especially building companies. His area of investment expertise and interest spans the whole globe, including energy, information technology, infrastructure, and cybersecurity. He led Venrock's internet investment strategy beginning in 1992. I think that's when the internet started, wasn't it? Or just when you arrived? And in 2004, initiated the firm's energy investment strategy as well. His successful investments include Checkpoint Software Technology, the world leader in internet security, DoubleClick, Spyglass, Digix, U.S. Internet Work, and scores of others. His track record in cybersecurity is second to none, and he's an avid spokesman for the venture industry, for innovation, and for entrepreneurship. I'm so thrilled to be able to ask you to welcome me, Ray Rothrock.
As Warren said, I've spent the last almost 30 years now in venture capital and working on cybersecurity. I think I may have been the first U.S. VC to go to Israel to discover an incredibly rich development environment there, but it's been great. I've done 15 deals. RedSeal, the company I'm CEO of now, I took the helm 2 years ago. And because of what I saw, what was evolving in the world of cyber, the world of enterprise, was an opportunity. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about State of the Union, where are we in cyber today, what's the strategy for the future, and then I'll talk about incidents and breaches, and then I have some closing thoughts, some of which I'm going to talk about. You heard already in these wonderful panels this morning. I really think you guys are onto something quite sharp there, and I will cruise through this pretty fast. So the State of the Union. Governments and law enforcement, this is a big deal, a very big deal. I think we heard some comments that they're way behind, but aren't we all? Cyber budgets are outpacing IT budgets. This is not necessarily a good thing because cyber takes away money from investing in revenue. And so it's a tax. It slows down business, so we have to get control of that. Last year, the world spent about $86 billion, 26 of which was on equipment, software, and so forth, and $60 billion on services. So far, most people in the cyber business have focused on prevention, compliance, and control, which was a small part of the IT budget, these massive IT budgets. And private investment is very high. In fact, the top chart is dollars in companies investing into venture capital into cyber investments, and the bottom would be a bar chart showing that most of it is startups. So as fast as the bad guys invent an attack, some enterprising entrepreneur comes up with a solution, convinces some venture capitalist to give them $5 million, and off they go. In fact, there are 1,400 cybersecurity companies, startups. There's only 21 public companies, so this is a very young industry. Every company and every organization is a target. And of course, if you've been a target and showed up in the newspaper, you know exactly what that feels like. It's not very good. But every week there's a breach. And a breach is the result of an incident that wasn't taken care of. So common business practices challenge this, right? Business should be open. We just heard about free trade. Well, we want business to flow very quickly too. But security people want to put up the walls, right? The CEO wants his email to get out. The security guy wants to stop it. It's just a natural tension in business. A very big deal in the world of commerce is M&A. So M&A, the process. We go through a process of investigating books. We look at intellectual property. We actually get resumes on people and all this sort of stuff. But no one ever checks the network. And if the network is a crappy network that could bring risk to you, you should be aware of that. I think there's going to be big changes in the world of M&A, in law firms, in fact, as well. Regulatory dynamics. You know, someone told me about the number of regulatory bodies in the public markets here in Canada. It's a lot. And these create all kinds of cracks. Bad guys can get in, but also it just creates confusion. IP, I mean, if you spend all this money on intellectual property and it gets stolen, what's the point? And then major organizational changes, disgruntled employees. Someone said in the panel earlier how the insider threat is a really big deal. It is a really big deal. So international border complexities with privacy and so forth. I've been involved with a number of companies that have operations around the world, and invariably they build separate operations to accommodate the laws of the land. So it's complex, it's early, and it's hard. So let's just look at a little bit about history. So the internet started in about 1991, 1992, but before that we had PCs on your desktop, and we had floppy disk. Anybody remember floppy disk? And then we were worried about viruses would get from one to the other and so forth. So in the early days, we had an antivirus strategy, and that's all cybersecurity was. Symantec, McAfee, these were huge companies, came to be overnight, very successful. And then when the internet happened in 92, we were suddenly hooking companies together. And that created another issue. So you got a supply chain, you've got, if something bad happens at my company and I give that virus to the next guy, I need to have some protection. So we came up with this whole technology sector, firewalls and intrusion detection and so forth, for network and host. And so as the threats evolved and as our businesses changed, we accommodated that. So over this period of time, I invested in, well, I'm just going to go point it out. So I was very lucky to be at the right place at the right time. As a venture capitalist, I invested in this one, this one, this one, this one. They all went public. They all became big companies, and they were leaders in their field. And they had a lot of competition. So the Rockefeller family for whom I worked really appreciated it, of course. But it was fun because all these were leaders. Someone mentioned Phil Zimmerman this morning. He was the guy that came up with PGP, and he actually, I remember he got in trouble by putting the code on his T-shirts and wore it out of the country. That was how he got around trade issues. So, but then in December of 2013, the world changed. And boy, did it. Target Corporation made the headlines. A reporter for the Washington Post discovered the fact that addresses and stuff were being leaked out, and he found them in the deep web, or the dark web as it's called. You can't see this. When the alarms were going off, they had tons of information that they had a problem. It was actually discovered in Bangalore, not in the United States. Bangalore picked up the bat phone and called headquarters and said, "We got problems. Our cash registers are being attacked. What's going on?" And I don't know if you know the story. It was actually a vendor doing an HVAC routine maintenance, came in with a corrupted laptop, plugged into the target network, and that malware started hunting, automatically hunting across the network. And I don't care what kind of policies you had, problem is that found its way into the cash registers. And then it found it into the memory. And in the memory of the cash registers was people's names, phone numbers, credit information, and so forth. Management was completely unprepared. Then when they found out about it, they made a really bad choice. They decided to let those cash registers run, let the malware continue to ship out records, 40 million of them. So that management got fired overnight. I don't know how much they've spent cleaning the mess up, but dare say that Target did get a black eye, and it remains to this day, actually. But this changed the world because we all thought we were safe. We've invested $86 billion in all this software and stuff, and yet Target happened. So the question I started asking myself sort of near the end of my time at Venrock, I retired in 2013, was, well, why is this happening? Because I built great companies, great products. Why is this happening? You know, Target, the CEO was fired, Home Depot, a huge court battle. Jamie Dimon doubled his budget from $250 million to $500 million. It's in his annual report on cyber alone, and he still got hit in 2014. And then, of course, Sony. Well, that's one I could talk all afternoon about. But I dare say on the Saturday before Christmas of 2014, I got a phone call from the CISO of Sony who said, "Ray, the guys at Cisco say you can help me rebuild my network." Sony could not find the malware. It was in the routers, not in the computers, not in the telephones, it was in the routers. So Cisco's advice was, reset your routers to factory reset. So the global Sony network, Sony Pictures network, was shut down cold dark. Couldn't make a phone call, no data, no nothing. They called me and said, "Can you help me rebuild the network?" I did. Took us 8 days, but they built it better than it was before. I'll get to some of that later. But Think about that. If your only solution to a malware attack is to reset the network, well, the trade, everything's going to go away. So why is this happening? Let me get the thing going here. So it's happening because we have built very fragile, complex networks. So back in the 90s, we just had wires connecting computers. And then Apple introduced Wi-Fi, and suddenly we had wireless activity. And then we had cellular activity, and then we have cloud, which is happening now, and IoT. Note here the vertical axis is logarithmic, powers of 10 with time. RedSeal came into being in about 2004. We were recognizing the complexity of it. Actually, one of my other jobs at Venrock, being an engineer, I couldn't help myself, but I ran the IT department, and I actually programmed the routers and programmed the firewalls and did all that with kind of a do-it-ourself kind of place. But these things were getting very complex. And if you note, this, since it's logarithmic, if I did this as a straight chart, it would just go through the roof. But each one of those added a layer of complexity. The problem is we don't understand all of it. We really don't. 342 routers. We have routers. We have seen routers at RedSeal that have 100,000 lines of instructions on them. Nobody knows what they do. It's incredible. So we have software to sort that out. So the problem is, however, it's been driven by decisions by business people, right? They want the cloud. The cloud's cheap. It works. The attack surface is huge. I heard that word this morning. Ken used it, Ken Taylor. It's a popular word from the military world that now CEOs are understanding. Networks are fragile. They were built by many people over a long period of time for many different purposes, and they never were ever rationalized. So now we've got a very fragile thing up there. But most importantly, we don't have enough talent. There's 1.5 million jobs open in North America for security professionals. That's a big number of people. There are only 2 million EEs, electrical engineers, in the United States. So cyber incidents are growing. There's a ton of data out there, from 3 million to 42 million over just a handful of years. And importantly, Gartner. So there's a gentleman at Gartner, his name's Neil McDonald. He's been there a long time. He's a worldwide expert on cyber. He made a statement last year, scared the bejeebers out of me. It says, in 2020, enterprise systems will be in the state of continuous compromise. So you've got firewalls, intrusion detection, all this other technology. You're going to be under constant attack. That's why it's happening today. You can't see this, but there's a cool website that puts breaches. It's dynamic. You pass your mouse over the bubble and it'll tell you everything about it. But this website just keeps growing and growing and growing because the breaches are happening over and over. Cyber is more than an expense. It's funny, but Target made us aware we had problems, but Sony really scared us because it was a state actor and it was very, very ugly what happened there. The budgets are increasing faster, like I said. That's real money. Takes away from developing new product and new services and revenue for your customers. And it takes away your reputation, like as in the OPM, the United States OPM, 21 million personnel records, including voice files, fingerprints, everything was taken. So the C-suite and the board must be involved. Up until now, they weren't so much. Just this year, I was starting to think about how to get to the board level, so I called Peter Gleason, who's the CEO of the National Association of Corporate Directors in Washington. And they are now having, if you're a big-time director, you remember this organization, and they have seminars on how to be a good director, and they're just having their first I think it's this month, June, their first cybersecurity thing for corporate directors. But when I asked Peter, I said, Peter, how much do corporate directors understand? He says, well, most of them can spell cipher with a C. They're not stupid people. They just haven't had to worry about it. So they need tools. So here's the thing that really got aside from what Neil said, this really gets my juices going. You can't see the color so well, but in 2014, it was determined that there was about $500 billion of actual documented financial losses, and the world spent about $75 billion to protect its assets. This is PwC. Projecting forward, they estimate that it'll be about $2 trillion of actual losses. That's just what's been reported, not what really happened. $2 trillion, that's a 4x increase in losses. But you can't spend to keep up with that. The spending only goes up to about 125 million. The ratio, I'm out of range. The ratio of the spend losses to the spend in 2014 was 6.6x, and it's 16x in 2018. This would suggest, the data suggests, that we're not winning the war, and we're not. Very scary. The motivation is money. Verizon has this great report that has a lot of detail, but it's all about money. People are stealing money. Public sector, financial sector. Those are the two most targeted areas, according to, this is real data, targeted. And the adversaries, of course, are getting really smart, really good, and very well resourced because they're stealing the money. Interesting, it was brought up this morning about human beings. So there are lots of incidences, 40 or 50 million. Only a few percent become breaches when something actually leaves the organization. But 95% of the breaches are a result of a phishing attack. You know what a phishing attack is? Where your email looks like really official, your CEO says wire money to so-and-so. So a human being made a mistake, a human being. So that's a serious statement about things. So where are we here? Prevention is essential, but it's not sufficient. It's a tax, and as we know, the more you tax something, the less you get of it. So prevention is not winning. We got to have a new approach. And it was mentioned several times this morning, it's resilience. So this is a hard thing to think about. When I talk to a lot of CISOs and IT people, resilience is not on the tip of their mind. Turns out we have a lot of great examples in our modern life of resilience that came to be over many long time. Take a building, a modern building. If we had a fire in this building in some other part of the building, we may not even know about it, but there's sensors and the fire alarms, the sprinklers and all that. And when the fire department rolls up here, they've already got the plans of the building. They know where to shut the power off. They know how to do this. They know how to do that. That's called resilience. They've made that building resilient to a fire so nobody gets hurt, hopefully. You think about a factory, you know, you can have an issue in a factory and it just keeps cranking because they built the thing in a resilient method. Redundancy. Cars is the same thing. 100 years ago, in a Model T, you hit a tree, you're dead. Today, you hit a tree at 80 miles an hour and you walk away. That's called resilience. It's because engineers, we know we have a problem, you anticipate what those problems are, and you build a product to suit that. We have not done that in our networks. So what it's all about, there's three things you got to do. You got to be able to detect it, analyze it, where is it, and then you don't do either of those unless you know a whole lot about that network. So resilience, you need to be prevention and resilience. To reduce successful attacks, the better your prevention, the more likely you're not going to have an attack. You need to be able to detect, respond, and remediate, and all of this to reduce customer harm. Expected results, I would hope you could see a higher productivity from your small, understaffed team. It's a big deal. We rein in that cyber budget so we can put that money to revenue purposes rather than preventive purposes. Reduce that IT footprint from the cyber point of view. I think everybody would like to do that. But most importantly, you keep your customers safe and keep your reputation intact. We were just talking at the table here, the SWIFT, where money moves around the world. JP Morgan, it was in the newspaper yesterday, JP Morgan is reevaluating their SWIFT policy of using it and putting in additional measures to confirm before they use it because SWIFT's had a few very visible break-ins, so people's confidence is just a little shaken. We can't have that in the modern world. Economies crunch. They die if we lose confidence. So in an incident, this is a cool chart from Logarithm. Basically, it takes about 270 days from the time that malware hits you until that you have some ability to detect it. In 270 days. Can you imagine if you let a burglar into your home for 270 days, what they could do? How many drawers they could look in? How many things they could steal? Well, so the point of this is you got to shorten it. Time is of the essence to detect, analyze, respond, remediate, and repair. That's what the world's all about going forward. That's where a lot of my investments are these days. Come on, there we go. So just real quick, this is a Cartoon Network. I'm not going to explain too much of it, but it's, you've probably seen cartoons like this before. I don't mean to get too technical, but in the middle here, let's say some malware got into a host computer, and these things are automatic. It's not like there's a human being driving it. This thing just hunts, just goes hunting for patterns on all your other computers. And oh my golly, this little guy here, there's a red server, which is an important one. It found something there, and it goes to another server that's blue, and that's not so important. Okay, I'm going to have to do it from over here. Anyway, this thing keeps hunting and it just goes all over the network. Oh, my goodness, it found the money. So it starts to, come on, extract the money. It says, yep, this is money. Now it phones home, command and control. Some human being comes in, shows up, and starts taking your money. Now, like I said, it takes 270 days on average from the time they find it to the time that you take action on it. But there's software like RedSeal and many others where you can go in and literally cut that supply line instantly and leaving the rest of the corporation completely operating perfectly. It's that fire in the corner of the factory. You took care of it. Nobody was harmed. You shut down the bad stuff, and it's all good. So just go through this pretty quick. The way when I get in front of a CISO and we have conversations about how to think about resilience, the first thing you got to do is you got to understand your network, how it's been built. Nobody has maps. Maps are only this good. You need a model. You need something that can tell you how things are going. Think about a Google map for your network. Very, very important. You got to measure. You got to have metrics. I mean, you cannot manage what you do not measure. That's the first thing they teach you in business school. You have to have policies, and there are plenty of public policies, but you have to have your own policies. And then you have to have detection, and usually you get that with threat intel. There's companies out there, one in Boston called BitSite, it's run by a good friend of mine. They have the ability to tell you about the neighborhood you live in. So are you being attacked from bad IP addresses, countries that want to hurt you, from your competition? They can figure all that out. RedSeal, for example, tells you how healthy you are. So we're an inside guy, BitSite's an outside guy. The two of those actually make a pretty powerful solution. So just real quick, your network's got all kinds of equipment. It's complex. We suck all this information into our model. Nice and slow. Come on, there we go. And we also, there's other software out there that people run called vulnerability scanners. We bring that in and we create this knowledge of the network and all about it. Then we can test it. Now, ingress and egress, that's a simple concept. We did this for Cisco Systems about 4 years ago. And when we ran the how is stuff getting out, the entire network turned blue with these blue arrows. It was just a smear of blue ink. There wasn't any, they thought they had it well protected, but there were so many ways out. It was incredible. And in fact, they paid for our software simply by shutting off things that they were paying for they didn't even know they had. Incredible. It's because it's been built over a long time. Resilience, the ability to respond, action is really important. All your CISOs and those guys will tell you that. We have a cool little app that informs the CFO or the CEO. It trends over time. It comes up with a score, just a number. Boards understand numbers. You know, they don't understand zero-day attacks or antivirus, but they understand numbers. So we give you a number. In this case, that was trending well over time, and then all of a sudden it shot up. So the CEO or the CFO looks at this and says, hey, what happened? Doesn't have to, start programming routers like I used to do. So look, cybersecurity today, networks are complicated. There's not really any measures. It's all about money. Come on. Prevention is essential, but it's not sufficient. Most organizations are understaffed and under-budgeted, even the federal government, the U.S. federal government. The U.S. federal government is one of our largest customers, and we are installed in all three-letter agencies, including the NSA. It's a big deal to them. We're also in forward operating bases of the military. It's pretty exciting business we have them. The threats are evolving quickly, so you can't up your prevention as fast as the bad guys can figure out how to get in, so you will catch on fire. You got to put it out. So you need a map, you need a resilience. Cyber housekeeping. There was some of the mention this on the panel. I'm asked this all the time. So what do? You've been in cyber for 30 years. You've got software. You've sold a lot of stuff. You got to get the board engaged. But most importantly, you got to train. Password protection, password hygiene. I think we ought to be teaching first graders about password hygiene. We teach them about nutrition. We teach them about manners. We should teach them about password hygiene. And phishing recognition. I was at an insurance company in Chicago last week giving a talk similar to this. And I said, so how many, these were risk officers, large insurers, about 100 people in the room. So how many people here actually train people on phishing? Every hand went up. And then one lady asked me, she said, we train every quarter on phishing, and we still have 27% of the people will push a phishing, even after they're trained. And it's the same people. I go, why do you keep those people around? Or why don't you take their computer off the network because they're just releasing stuff all the time. Phishing's a big deal. It's like fraud. We can design these networks better, but I don't know. Take Xerox, for example. They're not going to completely rebuild their entire network overnight. It's going to take decades. Deploy modern prevention, understand the threats. This is a hot area of investment, the threat intel space. Excuse me. There's the bad guys hang out here in this dark web, and there's now software that goes in there and looks for this stuff. It's a very hot area. I've actually backed 2 companies that were NSA engineers that are working on this. These were guys who made offensive software for the United States, and so they know what the offensive software looks like. They can build the defensive software to respond. Pretty interesting. You need to be prepared. We all know this, follow modern real-world first responders. We don't have to make this up. We've already done it in our modern society. And then rebuild the network. So anticipate, I talked about that. It's really important to anticipate. Because with you anticipate, you can plan for it, have an incident response capability so it doesn't become a breach. You need to be able to withstand an attack and recover from it and learn from it. It's amazing to me the number of people that just simply, I got it fixed, I'm back online. It's like they don't worry about it. Another company just last week was using our software, and suddenly a whole part of their network went dark. What happened? Well, someone was upgrading a unit and forgot to turn it back on. And that was trivial. It wasn't an attack, but our software detected that. So you have to be able to learn from. So he should have had a procedure list. And the other thing, I'll make a comment, it's not always about cyber attacks. In July 8th, last summer, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Stock Exchange, and United Airlines all went down for about 2 hours at the same time. And the Twitter feeds were full of, oh my gosh, we're under a cyber attack. It's a massive attack. And it was not a massive attack. Cisco had simply issued a router upgrade, and right on schedule, those engineers uploaded new software to the routers, and boom, it collapsed. That's the fragility of this network. That's the fragility of our modern economy. It's just really scary how fragile it is. Somehow we continue to go. So we have to evolve the network. We have to become resilient because prevention only goes so far, so we got to be able to respond. And we've done it with buildings, cars, planes, trains, you name it. We need to do it with our networks. Our network is our economy. And I've got a lot of data on that, but I don't think I have to defend that point. So anyway, that's the question I always say, when I get in front of a CEO, I'd love to get in front of Jamie Dimon and say, Mr. Dimon, you doubled the budget of your cyber guys. What did they present to you to either prove that what they spent that money on was going to work or that they needed the money in the first place? No longer is it good enough just to say. It's time for this kind of thinking to be built into our networks, which will be built into our economies, and save ourselves from the bad guys. We're not winning, but we can. That's it. Thanks.
Part of the reason we're gathered here today is talk about the digital opportunity in international trade, and we heard a lot about how there's a human factor on the cybersecurity part that is definitely a problem. In other words, there's no cure for stupid. The question I have is something we didn't really talk about today, and the proliferation of devices that are going to be connected. So it's not just the networks, it's the devices. And a lot of these devices are not designed with security in mind, they're designed with functionality. When you think about 50 billion devices in the next 10 years, all connected, and companies relying on the data from those devices, how do we win the war on that?
Yeah, that's a good one. We again, I'm going to borrow from the real world. We have these things called UL, Underwriters Laboratory. We have CE standards. You don't buy a computer. You look on the back of any of your phones, it's going to have a seal of approval. It's been certified. It's the FCC certifies, or RF is not going to burn your head off or whatever. We ought to do the same with cyber. We ought to have, if you're putting a device on the network, it ought to have to be tested, and that code should have been certified as secure as it can possibly be. There are companies, in Europe I know, in the US I know, I don't know about Asia so much, but there are companies, big companies that do that, mostly for big software, not for the little software. The other thing, so that's one, and I think we should come up with a standard, and that would be a perfect thing on an international basis to make sure everybody has that. The second thing, I think, is we need to train our engineers better. You know, I'm on the board of MIT, and to my, this is a little embarrassing, but they don't even teach encryption in their computer science program. It's an elective. I can't believe that. There are certain fundamental things that ought to, if you're going to be in that industry and you're going to make those products, there ought to be certain fundamental things that you got to know and know how to do well. So that's, I think, education, but mostly having standards that will certify that something's good.
Kind of a follow-on to the last one. What has been your efforts in working with law enforcement when these things happen?
Yeah, you know, that's, I can tell a few stories. I have not personally had to do that much. When I was at Vinrock, I would, every year, I'd have a big cyber day at the office, and I'd bring in a few FBI agents to talk about how they do this stuff. But unfortunately, the law enforcement, I have a portfolio company that runs a big network, global network. And every time something shows up, anonymous, for example, hacks into something, the FBI shows up at this company's headquarters. And they knock on the door and say, we want your records, we want all this sort of. And so, well, show me the warrant. So there's a real crush right now, and the whole FBI, remember the FBI Apple thing about privacy and all that? So we have, again, in the real world, lots of things to investigate with. We have laws, we have trained people, but I think law enforcement's a little aggressive at just expecting companies to give up their data. And I think companies need to be a little bit more responsible in how they protect their gear and stuff. So I think a discussion will be had. The FBI Apple thing was going to continue to percolate for a while. I was stunned that the FBI asked Apple if they could hack a phone. I got to believe the NSA can hack anything they want. So I was really caught by that, but it's created a firestorm in the Silicon Valley, which is very, you know, libertarian kind of, you know, leave me alone, don't bother me mentality. But law enforcement rarely shows up on my doorstep. The two engineers I backed in two different companies from the NSA are really smart, and they have some views about how they know how, when they were NSA engineers, how they could have had their jobs made easier had they had access to industry. And Silicon Valley is 3,500 miles away from DC, and the two don't get together very often. So more needs to happen there.
Ray,
yes.
a final question. 2 or 3 years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago, we had to take some of the Government of Canada's computers offline as a result of cyber attack. How satisfied are you with the state of security at the governmental level, first? Secondly, looking at who the bad guys are, I assume the organizations with the greatest resources to make attacks are in fact state-sponsored. If you were to list where the threats are coming from, who are the greatest threats?
Well, there's a lot of talk about China coming after intellectual property in the United States. One of our customers was completely fleeced from Chinese IPs. But you don't know if it really is because it's easy to spoof an IP. That's the address from which transactions occur. I told you the story last evening. I was at the New York Stock Exchange. They have a war room, a security operations center. And there, it looks like the back of it looks like an airline map in the back of one of those magazines with all these arcs into New York City from all over the world, including the United States and Canada, all over. And there were these giant white blobs in the oceans with these huge pipes coming into New York City. And I said to the CISO, I said, what is that? They said, oh, that's a pirate ship. I said, a what? A pirate ship? He says, yeah, these bad guys, criminals, you know, the mafia and stuff like that, they'll buy a barge, put power on it, generators, and thousands of PCs, and use satellite links to just automatically bombard. And they can move those targets anywhere they want. So I think pirates, I think the financed bad guys are really the biggest threat. They want your money, and we know that that's how the economy flows. So if they bring it down, and we spend more to protect, it's going to bring it down. State actors, I don't see much of that.
So in fact, you would rank private actors as being more dangerous than state-sponsored
because
actors.
of the money side of it, right.
And then the other question about the security of government installations. I realize you're in a difficult position commenting on Canada. In the U.S., how confident are you that that your personal and your corporate data that you share with the government of the United States is secure?
I don't feel too good about it. The IRS had a big breach. I wish they bought more RedSeal and sooner. But we're getting better, and the government is allocating. The president just launched the Cyber Commission that's going around the country investigating how to best to do things. But these systems are just like enterprises. They're fragile. They've been built over a long period of time. They weren't built with this in mind. So we either have to start over or slowly evolve them. I don't feel very confident. I have had my ID stolen. I got a phone call at like 4 in the morning once from a New York bank saying, "Are you Mr. Rothrock?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Well, we're just confirming your name, rank, address." And so I said, "Well, who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm a bank. Here's a credit application." They had everything but my mother's maiden name. So I had to go through that whole process of undoing things. So.
Not the cheeriest note on which to end today, but an important one for us to end on. Ray, on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. The figures that you gave us, the trends that you pointed out to us, the vulnerabilities that we see, but also the actions that we could be taking to ensure that we are more secure from attacks and that we're more resilient if we are attacked. All of this is extremely valuable to us, and we are very grateful to you for coming and sharing with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.